The convoy log listed him as missing. Not wounded. Not transferred. Not delayed. Missing. Which, on the frozen road across Lake Ladoga, meant only one thing. He had fallen behind. And no one ever came back after that. Until one night, someone walked out of the darkness and asked why they had left him there. The men at Checkpoint 47 did not speak about it at first. Not because it was classified, but because it didn't make sense. Winter had tightened its grip completely. Temperatures dropped below -30. Engines failed without warning. Fuel thickened. Metal cracked. And men simply stopped moving. The road itself was barely visible. A narrow line of compressed snow stretching across the frozen surface, marked by broken poles and abandoned vehicles half buried in ice. This was part of what soldiers called the lifeline. The only connection keeping Leningrad alive during the siege. Convoys moved mostly at night, to avoid air raids. Headlights dimmed. Engines strained. No stopping. That was the rule. If a truck broke down, the convoy kept moving. If a man fell behind, the convoy kept moving. Because stopping meant losing everything. Sergeant Pavel Morozov enforced that rule. Not because he was cruel, but because he had seen what happened when it was broken. Engines froze. Men froze. Entire convoys vanished. So when driver Alexei Grishin's truck stalled at 21:10, Pavel didn't hesitate. "Leave it," he ordered. Alexei protested. "There's still fuel." "Leave it," Pavel repeated. The convoy moved. And Alexei followed. On foot. That was the last time anyone saw him. Until the report was written. 22:40, driver Grishin. Missing. Presumed dead. The wording was standard. Routine. Because it happened often. Too often. At Checkpoint 47, Corporal Denis Sokolov received the report. Logged it. Filed it. Another name. Another loss. Routine. But routine began to break around midnight. The wind shifted. Not stronger. Not colder. Just different. It carried sound differently. Denis noticed it first. He stepped outside briefly. Pulled his coat tighter. Listened. Nothing unusual. And yet, he stayed outside longer than necessary. As if expecting something. Inside the bunker, two others sat in silence. Private Leonid Petrov and mechanic Yuri Antonov. They didn't speak much anymore. Not out here. Words felt unnecessary. Time passed slowly. The clock read 1:30. Then 2:10. Then 2:20. And still no convoy returning. Unusual. But not impossible. Delays happened. Ice shifted. Routes changed. Denis rechecked the log. Grishin. Missing. He tapped the page with his finger. Once. As if confirming it. And then, a shape appeared on the road. Far out. Barely visible. Leonid saw it first. "There," he said. Denis turned. Squinted into the darkness. At first, it looked like distortion. Heat over ice. But there was no heat. The shape moved. Slowly. Too slowly. "Single figure," Yuri muttered. No one spoke after that. Because single figures did not arrive here. Not alone. Not from that direction. The man walked unevenly. Not collapsing. Not crawling. Walking. Step. Pause. Step. as if measuring each movement. Dennis felt something tighten in his chest. "That's not possible," he said. But he didn't explain why. The figure came closer. Closer. And then stopped. Just outside the perimeter. Not approaching further. Not calling out. Just standing. Waiting. "Identify yourself," Dennis shouted. The wind carried his voice across the ice. No response. The figure remained still. Leonid shifted uneasily. Why isn't he answering? No one had an answer. Dennis stepped forward slightly. "State your unit." A pause. Then, a voice. Hoarse. Dry. "You left me." Silence. Yuri frowned. "What?" The figure took one step closer. And now, they could see more. The coat. The posture. Familiar. Too familiar. Dennis felt his stomach drop. "No," he said quietly. Leonid looked at him. "What?" Dennis didn't answer. Because he already knew. The figure spoke again. "My truck." Another step. "You told me to leave it." Now there was no doubt. Yuri inhaled sharply. "That's Grishin." But that made no sense. Because Grishin had been missing for hours. In this cold. No one survived that long on foot. No one. The man kept walking. Slow. Unsteady. But alive. Against every expectation. Against every rule. Dennis stepped forward. Conflicted. Relief, and something else. Something heavier. "You should be dead," he said under his breath. The man stopped a few meters away. Looked at them. His face was pale. Frost clinging to his eyebrows. But his eyes. Clear. Too clear. "Why didn't you wait?" Grishin asked. No accusation in his tone. Just a question. A simple one. And that made it worse. Dennis hesitated. Because there was an answer. But no good way to say it. "Orders," he replied finally. Grishin nodded slowly. As if he expected that. Then he said something else. Something quieter. "I wasn't alone." The wind picked up slightly. Snow moved across the ice. Dennis frowned. "What do you mean?" Grishin didn't answer immediately. He turned his head. Looked back. Toward the dark road behind him. And in that moment, Dennis felt it again. That same unease. That same sense. That something about this return was not right. "Where are the others?" Dennis asked. Grishin slowly turned back. His lips parted slightly. As if choosing his words carefully. And then, "They're still coming." Dennis looked past him. Into the darkness. At the road. At the empty, frozen expanse. Nothing moved. Nothing should have been there. And yet, he didn't feel alone anymore. They should have turned him away. That was the rule. No exceptions. No hesitation. Because one man freezing outside was survivable. But opening the checkpoint could destroy everything behind it. And yet, they were already stepping toward him. Dennis didn't remember making the decision. Not clearly. One moment, he was standing still. The next, he was walking across the packed snow toward Alexei Grishin. Each step felt heavier than it should. Not because of the cold. But because of what it meant. "You shouldn't be alive," Yuri muttered behind him. Grishin didn't respond. He was focused on breathing. Slow. Controlled. That alone was wrong. Men who survived exposure didn't breathe like that. They gasped, collapsed, shook uncontrollably. But Grishin stood upright, barely swaying, waiting. Dennis stopped a few meters away. "Are you injured?" he asked. Grishin shook his head. "No." A simple answer. Too simple. Dennis looked down. Grishin's boots were worn thin. Ice had formed along the seams. But there was something else. No deep drag marks behind him. No signs of collapse. Just a narrow line of footprints. Straight. Consistent. As if he had walked the entire distance without stopping. "That's impossible," Dennis whispered. Grishin heard him. "I didn't stop," he said quietly. Dennis looked up sharply. "You would have died." Grishin nodded once. "I know." A pause. Wind swept across the lake. Cold, dry, endless. Dennis felt something shift inside him. This wasn't relief. This wasn't even confusion. It was something closer to unease. "Who else was with you?" Dennis asked. Grishin didn't answer immediately. He turned again. Looked back into the darkness. "They fell behind," he said. "How many?" Another pause. 3. Yuri cursed under his breath. "Then where are they?" Grishin's eyes didn't leave the road. "Walking." Silence. Leonid stepped closer to Dennis. "This is wrong," he whispered. Dennis didn't respond. Because he was thinking. 3 more men. If they were alive. They needed help. If they weren't. Then what exactly was coming toward them? "Get inside," Dennis finally said. Grishin hesitated. Just for a moment. Then nodded. As he passed them, Yuri flinched slightly. Not visibly. But enough. Grishin noticed. He said nothing. Inside, the bunker felt smaller. The air heavier. As if something had followed him in. Leonid closed the door quickly. Locked it. Too quickly. Grishin sat down near the stove. He didn't reach for warmth. Didn't stretch his hands toward the fire. Just sat. Breathing. Dennis watched him carefully. "Tell me exactly what happened." Grishin looked up. "My truck stalled." "We know that." "I tried to fix it." Dennis nodded. "How long?" "I don't know." That wasn't unusual. Time didn't behave normally in that cold. And the others? Grishin blinked slowly. They were already on the road. "What road?" Yuri asked. Grishin frowned slightly. "This one." "No," Yuri said immediately. There was no one behind the convoy. Grishin's expression didn't change. They were there. Dennis stepped closer. "Describe them." Grishin hesitated again. Not confusion. Something else. "They were walking," he said. "That's not a description." Grishin's eyes narrowed slightly. As if they didn't feel the cold. Silence. Leonid shifted uncomfortably. "That doesn't mean anything," he said. Grishin ignored him. They didn't speak much. "How close were they?" Dennis asked. "Close enough." "Did you know them?" Another pause. "No." Yuri exhaled sharply. "So you followed strangers, in the middle of the lake?" Grishin looked at him. They were walking in the right direction. That answer settled nothing. It made everything worse. Dennis turned away. Looked at the door. At the thick wood separating them from the outside. "How long until they get here?" he asked. Grishin didn't answer. Dennis turned back. "How long?" Grishin met his eyes. They don't walk fast. A faint sound interrupted them. All heads turned. Silence. Then, a distant crunch. Faint, but unmistakable. Footsteps. On snow. Leonid went pale. No. Yuri moved toward the wall. Listening. Another step. Closer. Dennis felt his pulse rise. How far? He asked. Grishin didn't look toward the door this time. He was staring at the floor. They're here. A single knock echoed through the bunker. Not loud, but heavy. Final. No one moved. The sound came again. Slower. Measured. 3 knocks. Exactly the same rhythm as before. Leonid backed away. We don't open, he said quickly. No one opens. Yuri nodded. That's the rule. Dennis didn't respond. Because he was looking at Grishin. Waiting. Grishin didn't look at the door. Didn't react to the knocking. As if he had already heard it before. Another knock. Then a voice. Muffled through the wood. Help. Weak. Barely there. Human. Leonid shook his head violently. No. Yuri clenched his jaw. If we open that, they'll freeze, Dennis interrupted. They're already freezing, Yuri snapped. That's not the same. Silence fell again. The kind that demands a decision. Another knock. This time, weaker. Please. Dennis closed his eyes briefly. Orders. Procedure. Survival. Or something else. He opened his eyes. Looked at the door. Then at Grishin. Were they like you? He asked quietly. Grishin finally looked up. For the first time. There was something in his expression. Not fear. Not relief. Recognition. Yes, he said. Dennis felt something cold settle in his chest. Not the weather. Something deeper. Because now, the situation was clear. If they opened the door, they risked everything. If they didn't, they left men to die. Again. Another knock. Barely audible now. Fading. Time was running out. Dennis stepped toward the door. Leonid grabbed his sleeve. Don't. Yuri didn't move. Didn't speak. Just watched. Grishin said nothing. Only waited. Dennis's hand hovered over the latch. His breath slowed. Not from calm. From decision. And just before he touched it, another sound came from outside. Not knocking. Not a voice. Something heavier. A body, falling against the door. Sliding down. Leaving a faint scraping sound. Dennis froze. Because now, there was no more time to think. Only to act. His hand closed on the latch. And slowly, he began to open the door. In war, there are rules that keep men alive. And rules that keep them human. But under extreme cold, they begin to blur. The latch moved. Slowly. Not because Dennis was unsure, but because he already knew what it meant. Behind the door, someone had fallen. That was not a guess anymore. It was confirmation. The sound of the body sliding down the wood still lingered in the air. Soft. Final. Leonid stepped back instinctively. Yuri didn't move at all. He was staring at Dennis's hand. As if trying to stop it without speaking. Grishin finally stood up. Not quickly. Not dramatically. Just steadily. like a man accepting something he had already seen coming. Dennis stopped for half a second. Looked at him. "Tell me something," Dennis said quietly. Grishin didn't answer. Dennis continued. "If I open this door, are they alive?" A pause. Grishin looked at the door. Then at Dennis. "I don't know," he said. That answer was worse than certainty. Because uncertainty in this place meant risk without limit. Another faint sound came from outside. Not knocking. Breathing. Close to the wood. Condensed. Weak. Irregular. Leonid whispered. "They're still there." Yuri shook his head. "No one breathes like that after walking this long." Dennis exhaled slowly. He forced himself to think clearly. This wasn't supernatural. It couldn't be. There were only 3 realistic explanations. 1. They were survivors of a stalled convoy, suffering extreme hypothermia. 2. They were deserters, disoriented, returning by instinct. 3. They were bait for something worse, an ambush tactic, rare but documented in extreme frontline conditions. None of them were comforting. Another sound from outside. A hand sliding across the wood. Slow. Searching. Dennis tightened his grip on the latch. "You said there were 3, he said to Grishin. "Yes." "Are they soldiers?" A pause. "I don't know anymore." That sentence changed the air in the room. Leonid swallowed hard. "What does that mean?" Grishin didn't look at him. They stopped speaking after a while. Dennis frowned. "When?" "After the truck." Yuri stepped forward slightly. "So they were with you the whole time?" Grishin nodded once. "Yes." Dennis narrowed his eyes. "And you didn't stop?" Grishin shook his head. "No one stops on the road." That wasn't just doctrine. It was survival logic. Stopping meant freezing in minutes. Dennis understood that. Everyone did. But something about Grishin's tone suggested he wasn't just repeating rules. He was defending them. Outside. A faint voice. Broken. Barely audible. "Don't leave." Leonid flinched. Yuri stepped closer to the door. "No," he muttered. "That's not right." Dennis raised his hand slightly. "Wait." Silence again. Then the voice returned. Closer. "We're here." Dennis felt something tighten in his chest. Because the rhythm matched exactly what Grishin had described. Walking. Stopping. Walking. As if the voice itself was tired of existing. Dennis turned to Grishin. "Did you hear them speak like that on the road?" Grishin hesitated. Then nodded. "Yes." Yuri shook his head. "No one can talk in that cold for that long." Grishin finally looked at him directly. "They did." A pause. Then Dennis made his decision. He turned the latch. Slowly. Deliberately. Leonid whispered. "Dennis." But didn't stop him. The door creaked. Cold air pushed through instantly. Sharp. Violent. The kind that hit lungs like a fist. Dennis opened it just enough to see. Outside. A figure collapsed against the threshold. Not standing. Not attacking. Just falling forward. Dennis caught a glimpse of a face. Frostbitten. Exhausted. Eyes half open. Alive. Barely. Behind him, more shapes in the dark. 3. Exactly as Grishin said. Walking slowly toward the light. Yuri stepped back instinctively. Leonid froze completely. Dennis reacted immediately. Inside, he shouted. He grabbed the nearest man under the arms. Pulled. The man didn't resist. Didn't help. Just collapsed inside like weight without will. Grishin stepped forward and closed the gap. Looking at them. Not shocked. Not relieved. Quiet. As if confirming something. One of the incoming men stopped outside. Just at the threshold. Didn't enter. Didn't speak. Just looked. Dennis pointed. You, get in. No response. The man outside slowly raised his head. And said something almost too quiet to hear. We can't feel our legs. Yuri cursed under his breath. That's frostbite. Dennis grabbed the second man. Pulled him in. Leonid helped now, reluctantly. The third figure approached slowly. Step. Pause. Step. But he stopped just before the door. Looking inside. At Grishin. A long silence. Then. Grishin spoke. Softly. You kept walking. The man outside nodded. Barely. Yes. Dennis watched them. Something clicked in his mind. Not mystery. Not horror. Reality. Exhaustion. Hypothermia. Cognitive collapse. Group survival behavior. Shared disorientation in extreme cold. Men walking without stopping because stopping meant death. Men talking in fragments because language itself breaks under hypothermia. It all fit. And yet, something still felt wrong. Not supernatural. Psychological. Deep. Unstable. Dennis looked at all four of them now. Grishin. The three survivors. And understood something quietly terrifying. They weren't returning from the road. They were still on it. Inside their minds. The knock returned. But this time, it wasn't from outside. It was inside the room. From memory. From repetition. From survival instinct refusing to shut off. Dennis slowly closed the door. Locked it. But no one in the room relaxed. Because the road had already followed them inside. There is a point in extreme cold where the body stops behaving like itself. Not suddenly. Not dramatically. But step by step. It begins to misinterpret survival as comfort. And that is where most accounts from Lake Ladoga begin to look impossible. Even when they are not. The men were not taken to safety immediately. Nothing moved quickly in that place. Not vehicles. Not decisions. Not time. The bunker filled with heat that didn't feel like warmth. More like recovery attempting to restart something that had already slowed too far. The three survivors from the road were laid near the stove. Their boots were removed. Fingers inspected. Skin checked for signs of irreversible frost damage. Medic records would later describe them in clinical terms. Severe hypothermia. Confusion. Memory fragmentation. Delayed response to stimuli. But none of those words captured what Denis Morozov saw that night. He sat against the wall, watching them breathe. All of them. Alive. Barely. Grishin stayed upright. He didn't lie down. Didn't sleep. Just stared at the floor. As if waiting for something that never fully left. Private Leonid Petrov spoke first. Quietly. Almost ashamed. I remember hearing voices, he said. No one answered. He continued anyway. On the road. I thought there were more of us. Yuri, sitting nearby, nodded slowly. I thought so too. Dennis didn't interrupt. Because he had already read about this. After-action medical reports. Field notes. Later psychiatric summaries. In extreme cold, groups often reported additional voices, extra figures, non-existent convoy members. Not because they were hallucinating in a theatrical sense, but because the brain, deprived of heat and oxygen, began to misclassify patterns. Movement became presence. Sound became speech. Silence became threat. Grishin finally spoke. His voice was weaker now. Not broken. Just reduced. "There were always 3, he said. Yuri looked at him. "No. There weren't." Grishin didn't argue. He simply repeated. "They were there." Dennis stood up slowly. He walked toward the table. Opened the logbook. And for the first time, hesitated before writing. Because what do you record when every witness disagrees with itself? He wrote anyway. For survivors recovered from roadside exposure. Severe hypothermia. Cognitive disorientation. He paused. Then added. Subject accounts inconsistent. A safe sentence. A military sentence. A sentence that meant nothing and protected everything. Outside, the wind over the frozen lake had softened. Not gone. Just less violent. As if the storm had lost interest. Hours later, evacuation arrived. A sled convoy. Then a truck. Then men speaking in calm voices that belonged to a different world. Grishin was the last to leave the bunker. He stopped at the doorway. Looked back once. Not at Dennis. Not at the stove. At the floor. As if checking whether the road still existed under it. Then he stepped out. Dennis followed him outside briefly. The cold hit like absence itself. Grishin spoke one last time. They said we kept moving too long. Dennis didn't answer immediately. Then finally. That's what kept you alive. Grishin nodded. Slow. Uncertain. Or maybe understanding something no one else fully could. The convoy left before dawn. And the road behind them remained empty. No figures. No voices. No movement. Just ice. Endless ice. Weeks later, official medical documentation from the Leningrad supply sector would summarize the event simply. Extreme exposure incident on Ladoga supply route. Group survival under hypothermic disorientation. No hostile engagement confirmed. No mention of strange voices. No mention of impossible walking endurance. No mention of anything that could not be explained. Because everything had an explanation. Even when the explanation was incomplete. War does not only take lives. It takes the certainty of what life is supposed to feel like. And in places like Lake Ladoga, even memory becomes something that must be recorded carefully. Because once the cold enters thought, it does not leave the same way. If this story resonated with you, subscribe to help us remember and share stories from the front lines. Stories from the past help us understand humanity in difficult times. Share your thoughts in the comments, every memory matters.